$149 million for teacher training on the new curriculum, $35 million for the nutrition program, and the $65 million over 4 years to facilitate and work experience programs for high school and co-op programs and undergrads. So are all these programs funded over the above and the proposed $6.36 billion annual budget?
They are. Those are additional dollars. So really we're looking at those programs in particular, responding to the needs that were identified. The one about the need for teachers to really get up to speed with the new curriculum and be able to receive some good mentoring and some good training around the new curriculum, and then matching that actually with resources that the new curriculum is going to require, because it is a different approach. It is truly a reconsideration of some aspects of education in the province, and we need to not just support the teachers doing it, but we need to back that up with some support in schools. So that big number, the $1.5 billion, that's a larger investment just in K-12 education, and then we have some separate programs that are over and above that, and that's what you're the ones you're naming.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's one more question.
Certainly help.
Those are great questions, guys.
Alright, so our next topic will be on electoral reform, and we have grade 12 student Macaulay here to speak on that.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Alright, so the first question here is, the federal government has been running on promise to change the first past the post system, but have since changed their mind. Why should we believe that the Green Party wouldn't change theirs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I agree with you about I hear in that question a disappointment about the federal Liberal government backing away from the promises that were very clear during the campaign. I mean, how many times that we heard the Prime Minister, when he was campaigning, saying that this would be the next election, 2019, would be the first one that wouldn't be first past the post. And 2015 was the last first past the post. I mean, that was the mantra of that election. And a lot of us that were pretty excited when the Liberals got elected. It was one of the key excitements was really about electoral reform and seeing proportional representation coming into being. And then we had this parliamentary committee got struck, and they began to meet, and I was part of some town hall meetings in Kamloops that a group of us put together as activists just to really encourage the conversation and really hear from people and where we were going on this. And then all of a sudden, the train came off the track. It just derailed, and it was a huge disappointment. So I hear the question, which is the question I'm holding, which is how reliable are election promises, and what do people actually end up doing once they get into power? And I think it breeds a cynicism about politics when this happens in all of us. And it makes us think that what's the point of voting, what's the point of getting involved in political parties when they do this kind of stuff. And, I can say that as a Green, this is in our DNA. This is not like an election promise or something that we're just offering. This has been part of every Green movement in the world. It's actually part of our charter as a Green movement globally. So any Green party is an expression of a larger Green movement, and part of named right in there is proportional representation and true democracy. So I can say that we would have to go against the whole grain of our self-identity to not move very quickly towards electoral reform. Yeah, and I'd love to see it. I would just love to see it happen. I'd love to see it happen in BC. I'd love to see it happen in Canada. It makes sense. We're archaic, and we're stuck past this first past the post system, which generates a kind of Coke and Pepsi problem. You end up with just these two parties, right? And they just keep battling it out over decades. That's really what first past the post creates. So I'm all for that, and I think you can. It's very trustworthy that a Green government would bring about electoral reform right away. And by the way, the NDP have also come out and very clear that they would also bring in electoral reform. We differ on how we would do it, but basically both parties are in agreement on that.
That does seem to add weight to the promise. Another question here, and I guess that's kind of tied to what you just said, was what do you mean exactly by introducing proportional representation? So what system would be implied?
Yeah, there's several models out there. I know during the federal consideration just recently here, they were talking about several different possibilities, whether it was a single transferable vote or whether it was a mixed member or an urban-rural split. So I don't have personal preference about the systems. I see value in all of them. The one system I really would like us to look much more seriously at, and I know it got consideration during the federal process, is the New Zealand experiments. I think there's great value in looking at what New Zealand's done. And that's a mixed member system. And they're interesting because they're like us, they're Westminster, they come out of sort of the British, and they came out of a first past the post system very similar to our own, and yet they were able to make this transition over time. I like some of the elements of what they've done. So if there's any system I've seen in the world that I really gravitate towards, New Zealand, mostly because maybe it would give us a map that's consistent with where we've kind of come from already.
All right, and just one last one. It says on the party outline that a public watchdog is to be established to oversee government advertising and communications. So the question there is, how can we be sure that that watchdog would be impartial, and how would they be established?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There are a number of these commissions or boards that function at arm's length from the day-to-day running of the government. And they are supposed to be independent, and they're supposed to have their own ability to do that. And for the most part, people in our society trust them, whether, you can name several of them, the BC Utilities Commission, or you can talk about the Ombudsman, or you can talk about the Forest Practices Board. I mean, there's a number of these sort of, and they're designed to give government input. The Auditor General is another, probably the most important or the most active of all of these independent bodies. And they're designed to really give government input and to also give the public knowledge about what's really happening that isn't coming out of the government's public relations and putting a spin on it for whatever political purpose there might be. And there's definitely a need for that when it comes to how government is using advertising money. We're seeing that again in this election. So I guess the first answer to the first part of your question was sort of how do we trust something like this? I think we look at other models of ways we're already doing this with other parts of our political process and government operations, and we would just kind of imitate those in the sense of having the leadership of that really be arm's length from the political process. I don't quite know sort of the mechanics of how that would best come about. We're offering it right now as a direction from our platform, and then once if a green government comes into being, then we really sit down together and say, how do we best put this together? But that's really what we intended to do. And without it, the problem with not having it right now is that there's nobody looking over it. Yeah. So government can decide what they want to spend it on. And by the way, the Auditor General has already identified this twice in, I think it's '99 and again in 2014, with separate reports that basically said, the system we have now is really broken. So government, and the Auditor General did a good job of looking at other countries who actually have good guidelines around how governments do their own announcements and their own public relations. And it's really separated from political advantage, which is the problem we have in BC. We got a lot of problems in BC. We got a lot of problems, especially when it comes to the fox being in charge of the chicken coop, and then we wonder why there's no chickens. Because,
that's right. The concern is that the party in power kind of wields control over these supposedly independent beings.
That's right, exactly. That's right.
Stacia, if you want to wait, we have a few more students joining us.
Great.
So just so we don't, you can take a little break, drink
Yeah,
some
that'd
water.
be good.
So we don't